All right, so today we're taking a deep dive into some fascinating historical documents all about Lee Harvey Oswald.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and specifically excerpts from this JFK assassination research journal called The Fourth Decade.
Okay.
We've got articles, letters to the editor, even some imagery in here. And our mission today is to see if we can uncover any surprising connections or hidden details.
Sounds like fun.
Yeah, it should be good.
These types of sources can be really valuable,
Uh, Oh, absolutely.
because they shine a light on those less explored corners of history,
Yeah.
giving us a more intricate understanding of the events and the people involved.
Right, and with someone like Lee Harvey Oswald,
Oh, yeah,
there are always layers to peel back.
definitely.
So one thing that I thought was really interesting was his notebook. That's a pretty crucial piece of evidence in the whole JFK assassination investigation, right?
Absolutely.
And there's this one entry in particular that really stood out to me.
Okay.
It lists the address of the American Nazi Party in Arlington, Virginia. Not only that, it mentions Dan Burroughs. He was an American Nazi Party official.
Right.
And then there's a location in Queens, New York, that's connected to another group, the American National Party.
So this entry has fueled a lot of speculation, hasn't it?
Oh, for sure.
It raises the question, what was Oswald's connection to these groups? Was he just aware of them, or was there something more there?
Right.
Yeah.
The article Oswald and the Nazis dives into a few different theories about this.
Okay.
One suggestion is that maybe he got this information from news articles.
Ah.
But that seems a little unlikely because some of these articles were published when he was living in the Soviet Union.
Right. Yeah. How would he have access to them?
Exactly.
It's quite the mystery.
It is.
Yeah.
Another theory is that he was secretly connected to these right-wing groups, maybe even as part of some anti-integration or anti-Castro agenda, which actually makes me think about his activities in New Orleans.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Yeah. But the article argues that the most plausible explanation is that he was working as a government agent,
Okay.
potentially for the FBI.
Interesting.
Yeah, and that his task was to infiltrate and investigate these right-wing extremist groups.
Mm,
So in that scenario, his notebook would just be a record of his investigative work, essentially.
I see. Yeah, that's an interesting angle.
Right.
Yeah.
So then it gets even more interesting because the article also talks about this New York Welfare Department employee named Frank Rotella,
Okay.
who was, get this, a member of the American National Party and actually witnessed the suicide of Dan Burroughs.
Wow. What a small world.
Right. So that links Oswald's time in New York to the Nazi group mentioned in his notebook.
It is a grim connection, but it does connect those dots.
Yeah, it's pretty wild.
It's definitely intriguing, but we do have to remember that just because things coincide doesn't necessarily mean that they are directly connected.
Right.
We have to consider all the angles and weigh the evidence carefully.
Of course, yeah, that's true. So speaking of intriguing, let's shift gears to the Bolton Ford dealership incident in New Orleans back in 1961.
Yeah.
Two men tried to buy 10 trucks from this dealership, claiming to represent the Friends of Democratic Cuba.
Interesting.
Yeah. Now, one of these guys initially said his name was Joseph Moore, but then told the salesman to actually change the order to Oswald.
Hold on. They used Oswald's name.
They did, yeah. And then to make things even more strange, the second man claimed that Oswald was actually his name and that he would be the one to pay for the trucks.
Wow. So they were using Oswald's name a full 2 years before the assassination.
Yeah, which is strange in itself, but also Lee Harvey Oswald wasn't even in New Orleans in 1961.
Oh, wow.
So the big question becomes, who were these guys?
Yeah. And why use his name at all?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And it gets even more complicated when you bring Guy Bannister into the picture. He was a former FBI agent
Right.
and a really staunch anti-communist.
Okay.
And he was on the board of directors for this Friends of Democratic Cuba group.
So we've got this anti-communist group potentially connected to a former FBI agent using the name, and maybe even impersonating a Soviet defector to buy trucks.
Right. It's like, what's going on here?
Yeah, and some speculate that those trucks might have even been intended for the Bay of Pigs invasion.
It's wild, isn't it?
It really makes you wonder why they would go to such lengths. What were they trying to hide, or what were they trying to achieve? Because this incident really goes beyond the simple idea of Oswald as just a lone gunman. There are clearly more layers here to uncover.
Absolutely. Layers indeed.
Yeah.
So let's move on to another mysterious figure, David Ferry.
Oh.
His phone records are just packed with suspicious activity.
Yeah, Ferry was a controversial figure, definitely linked to Lee Harvey Oswald in New Orleans.
Right.
What makes his phone record so interesting is that he denied being in Dallas in the 10 years leading up to the assassination.
Hmm.
But his phone records tell a different story.
So he wasn't being truthful about his
It
whereabouts.
seems that way, yeah. The records show tons of calls to and from Dallas in 1962 and 1963,
Hmm.
including calls to a lawyer's office, a guy named G. Ray Gill,
Okay.
some people named Carl and Jimmy Sadler.
And for context, those Sadlers were pretty well known in Dallas, and they had rumored ties to organized crime.
Right.
So it makes you wonder what Ferry was doing in Dallas, you know?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
Investigators have been trying to figure that out for decades.
Right.
These calls completely contradict what Ferry was saying, and they raise serious questions about whether he was involved in anything related to the assassination.
It's like he was intentionally trying to keep his Dallas connections a secret.
It definitely looks suspicious.
Yeah.
But it's really important to remember that phone calls alone don't mean someone is guilty.
Right. Of course.
They just tell us that further investigation is probably needed,
Right.
especially given all of Ferry's other activities and his connection to Oswald.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot to unpack there. So, speaking of piecing things together, there's this photo we have to talk about. The Carabine Man photo.
Oh, okay.
It was taken in Dealey Plaza just moments after the assassination.
Wow.
And it shows this man seemingly running away with something in his hand that looks a lot like a rifle.
Huh.
It's pretty striking.
Yeah.
Now, the article, The Other Rifleman, looks at the photo's context, things like the position of the press bus and the Newman family, to try and get a sense of when exactly the picture was taken.
Okay.
And they estimate it was about a minute after the shooting.
So it's unlikely this guy is the assassin making a getaway.
That's what they think, yeah. It's more likely that he either picked up a rifle that was discarded by the actual gunman,
Okay.
or that he was part of some kind of cleanup crew.
Oh, wow. That's a chilling thought.
It is, yeah.
It really is.
And the article kind of encourages us, the readers, to actually study the image ourselves, and decide what we think the man is doing and what he's holding.
It's almost like a challenge to be an amateur historian.
Right, exactly.
Engaging with this primary source material and coming to our own conclusions.
Exactly.
It's great.
So, okay, we've got one more piece to examine before we move on.
Okay.
This is Captain W.R. Westbrook.
Right.
He was a Dallas Police Department captain, and his actions on November 22nd, 1963 were a little unusual, to say the least.
Okay, how so?
Well, he was in charge of the Personnel Bureau, a purely administrative role.
So he shouldn't have been in uniform or involved in the presidential visit.
Exactly, but here's the thing. After the assassination, he sent his subordinates to the Texas School Book Depository.
Okay.
But then she went there himself, even though he had no orders or authority to do so. And then he also rushed to the scene of Officer Tippett's murder in Oak Cliff, again without any orders.
So he's at both of these key locations.
He is.
Oh.
And get this, he was present at the Texas Theater during Oswald's arrest and even participated in apprehending him.
So he was involved in all the major events of that day.
Right, and his testimony about his position in the theater during the arrest is actually conflicting.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
It's almost like he was trying to be invisible and highly visible at the same time.
Right.
What a strange thing.
It is, and despite being so involved in everything that happened that day, he's barely mentioned in the Warren Report.
It's almost like someone deliberately tried to downplay his role in the whole thing.
Right, so the question is, why was Westbrook so active in this investigation, despite his administrative position?
Yeah, and why was his involvement kind of swept under the rug in the official report?
Really makes you think.
It does, it does. Yeah, it really is strange, isn't it? I mean, it's almost like someone was trying to control the narrative, right?
Right, like we're only getting a partial view of what happened.
Yeah, and those missing pieces, they really make you think about Oswald's ties to those Nazi groups we talked about.
Oh yeah, for sure. It's disturbing, isn't it?
Definitely a complex element to this whole thing.
Absolutely, but we have to be careful how we approach it, We can't jump to conclusions.
Of course, facts first, always.
Right, and the article makes that clear, too, that just because Oswald's notebook mentioned those groups, it doesn't necessarily mean he was actively involved or that he even agreed with them.
Yeah, you're right. It's important not to read too much into things.
Exactly.
We need to weigh the evidence and consider all the different ways this could be interpreted.
Right, like one theory is that he was an informant for the FBI.
Right, maybe gathering intel on those right-wing extremists.
Like some kind of counterintelligence operation.
Exactly. That would make sense if he was trying to infiltrate those groups.
It sounds like something out of a spy movie, doesn't it?
It does. But we do have to remember there's no proof of that, at least not yet.
So we're still left with that big question. What were Oswald's true motivations? Was he a pawn in some larger game?
Or was he driven by something else entirely, by his own beliefs?
It's tough to say, and those are questions people are still debating today.
Yeah, it's possible we'll never have a definitive answer.
That's true, but the fact that we're still asking these questions shows just how complex this case really is.
Definitely.
And how important it is to stay open to different perspectives.
Exactly.
And that's something I think is important for all of us listening to remember too, right?
Absolutely.
We need to be critical thinkers,
Yeah.
question our assumptions,
Yeah.
explore all the angles.
That's what makes these deep dives so much fun.
Oh, totally.
It's not just about rehashing old info.
Right.
We're actively engaging with it, trying to make sense of all the pieces.
Right, like a giant puzzle.
Exactly, a historical puzzle.
And every piece we find seems to lead to something new and unexpected.
Oh, for sure. It's a process of discovery, and that's what makes it so rewarding,
Absolutely.
We're learning, we're questioning, and hopefully expanding our understanding of this huge moment in history.
Right, absolutely. Okay, so speaking of pivotal moments.
Yeah.
Let's go back to the Caribbean Man photo for a minute.
Okay.
I mean, the article really encourages us to study that image.
Yeah.
To consider what we see.
It's like a visual analysis exercise.
Exactly, right. It's not just about accepting what others have written about it. It's
Yeah.
about looking at the evidence for ourselves and coming to our own conclusions.
Exactly. And what makes the Caribbean Man photo so fascinating is that it makes you think about what happened immediately after the assassination.
Right.
Was there a coordinated effort to cover things up?
Yeah.
Were there more people involved than we know about?
All valid questions. And the article suggests that the man in the photo could have been part of a cleanup crew.
Right. Someone tasked with removing evidence that could point to the real assassins.
Exactly.
That's a chilling thought.
It is. It really is. And it kind of brings us back to Captain Westbrook and his strange involvement in all of this.
Right. He was in a key position, but his role is barely even acknowledged in the official report.
Yeah, it's like he was a ghost moving in the shadows of this whole investigation.
It's strange, isn't it? The article highlights some of his actions that day, things that don't make sense given his administrative role.
Right, like sending his people to the Texas School Book Depository and then going there himself.
Right. And then he rushes to Officer Tippett's murder scene.
Yeah, and he's at the Texas Theater for Oswald's arrest, too.
I mean, it's almost as if he knew these events were going to happen.
Like he was following some kind of script.
Exactly. His actions really suggest he had some foreknowledge, or that things were coordinated in a way that's difficult to explain.
Absolutely.
And the article also mentions that Westbrook ordered officers to take down the names of everyone who was at the Texas Theater when Oswald was arrested. But that list, if it ever existed, has disappeared.
Wow. Another missing piece of the puzzle.
Right. Makes you wonder what else might have been lost or destroyed over the years.
Yeah, it really does feel like someone was trying to cover their tracks.
Yeah. Trying to make it harder to uncover the truth.
Which is why it's so important to keep digging.
Absolutely. To keep searching for those missing pieces and try to put together a complete picture of what happened.
This whole deep dive is really about uncovering those hidden details and getting a more accurate understanding of the JFK assassination, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely. It's a process of exploration and analysis, and a reminder that history is not always what it seems.
Sometimes the most important clues are hidden in the details that others might overlook.
Exactly. And that's what makes this kind of research so exciting.
It is.
We're not just accepting the official narrative.
Right.
We're challenging it, looking for the truth wherever it may lead.
Absolutely. And that's what's so great about historical research. It's this never-ending quest for knowledge and understanding, and it's a journey we can all take together. Man, we've really gone down the rabbit hole today, haven't we?
We have. It's a lot to take in.
Yeah, it really is. But, even with these kind of sensitive topics,
Right.
our mission here is to learn and understand,
Absolutely.
not to sensationalize or, fuel conspiracy theories.
Right. We're here to look at the evidence, think critically,
Right.
and consider different viewpoints. And that brings us to the last document for today's deep dive.
Okay.
It's an article about Captain W.R. Westbrook
Okay. Yeah.
and his actions on November 22nd, 1963.
This one's really interesting because Westbrook was in charge of the Personnel Bureau.
Right, a purely administrative role.
Right. So you wouldn't expect him to be right in the middle of things in Dealey Plaza that day.
No, not at all. And yet, the article talks about some very unusual actions he took.
What stood out to you?
Well, first, he sends his subordinates to the Texas School Book Depository.
Right.
But then he goes there himself.
Mm-hmm.
Even though he didn't have any orders to do so, no authority to be there.
It's almost like he knew something was up, right?
It is strange, yeah.
Yeah.
And then he also rushes to the scene of Officer Tippett's murder in Oak Cliff,
Right.
again without orders.
So he's at all the key locations.
He is, and to top it off, he's at the Texas Theater when Oswald's arrested.
Wow.
And he even participates in the arrest.
So he's right in the thick of it, but even though he was so involved, the article says he's barely even mentioned in the Warren report.
It is a curious omission, isn't it? Especially considering all the activity he was involved in.
Right, like someone was trying to erase him from the story.
Yeah, it makes you wonder why.
It does. What do you think about Westbrook's motives? I mean, what do you think he knew? Was he acting alone, or was he taking orders from someone?
I think it just shows that there are still so many unanswered questions about the JFK assassination,
Yeah, I think you're right.
even after all these years.
Absolutely. So, what does all this mean for everyone listening? What have we learned about Lee Harvey Oswald?
Well, I think these documents show us that the JFK assassination is a case that needs constant scrutiny. We shouldn't just take the official story at face value.
Right, we should keep asking questions, explore all the possibilities, stay open to different explanations.
Exactly, because sometimes the truth is stranger than fiction.
It really is.
And the most important clues are sometimes hidden in plain sight.
Yeah, I think that's a good takeaway. So, as you think about all the things we've discussed today, the documents, the details, the connections, I want you to ask yourself, what does it all mean to you? What new questions have come up? What conclusions have you drawn?
Remember, history isn't a fixed set of facts. It's a constantly evolving story.
That's a great point.
And it's up to all of us to engage with that story, question it, and help shape it.
Absolutely. So, keep learning, keep exploring, and most importantly, keep searching for the truth.
Because the truth is out there, waiting to be discovered.
This has been another really fascinating deep dive, and I don't know about you, but I'm leaving with more questions than answers.
That's the beauty of historical research, though, isn't it? It's a never-ending journey of discovery.
That's a great way to put it, and it's a journey we can all take together. So thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the JFK assassination. And keep exploring. The world is full of mysteries, and the truth is always worth seeking.